Gray Falcon website. In 1947, Admiral Richard E. Byrd led 4,000 military troops from the U.S., Britain, and Australia in an invasion of Antarctica called Operation High Jump, and at least one follow-up expedition. This is fact. It is undeniable. But the part of the story that is seldom told, at least in official circles, is that Byrd and his forces encountered heavy resistance to their Antarctic venture from flying saucers and had to call off the invasion. This aspect of the story was pushed forward again a few years ago when a retired rear admiral, allegedly living in Texas, who hadn't been involved in the invasion, said he was shocked when he read material from a documentary entitled Rye from the Sky. He allegedly claimed that he knew there had been a lot of aircraft and rocket shoot-downs, but did not realize the situation was as serious as the documentary presented it. Operation High Jump, which was basically an invasion of the Antarctic, consisted of 3 naval battle groups which departed Norfolk, Virginia on December 2nd, 1946. They were led by Admiral Richard E. Byrd's command ship, the icebreaker Northwind, and consisted of the catapult ship Pine Island, the destroyer Brownson, the aircraft carrier Philippine Sea, and the U.S. submarine Senate, 2 support vessels Yankee and Merrick, and 2 tankers, Canistad and Capacan, the destroyer Henderson, and the float plane ship Currituck. A British Norwegian force and a Russian force, and I believe some Australian and Canadian forces were also involved. Interestingly, the Pine Island, one of the seaplane tenders involved in the exploration, had a rather colorful history. The USS Pine Island, a Currituck-class seaplane tender, was laid down 16 November 1942 at Todd Shipyard Corporation in San Pedro, California. It was launched February 22, 1944, and given the commission named USS Pine Island on April 26, 1945. The ship served through the final months of the Second World War and the immediate post-war period, but was decommissioned on the 1st of May 1950 when the Korean War broke out. The ship was recommissioned on October 7, 1950 at Alameda, California. She was finally decommissioned for good on June 16, 1967 and laid up in the reserve fleet. But here's where the story gets interesting. The USS Pine Island was struck from the Naval Register on an unknown date. Her title was transferred to the Maritime Administration for layup in the National Defense Reserve Fleet on an unknown date, and the ship's final disposition is unknown. Now, how does one go about losing a major surface ship over 640 feet long, almost 70 feet wide, with a displacement of over 15,000 tons? Well, there's a rejoinder. The author says, as a federal employee with immediate access to NDRF, the National Defense Reserve Fleet, archives, which are all unclassified, let me provide additional information as it relates to the subject story of 315. Mr. Coron states, the USS Pine Island was struck from the Naval Register on an unknown date. Her title was transferred to the Maritime Administration for layup in the National Defense Reserve Fleet on an unknown date, and the ship's final disposition is unknown. Here's what I can tell you. Pine Island was delivered to Zidell Explorations in Portland, Oregon, now Zidell Marina, on 3/7/72 under a standard scrapping contract. Zidell paid $166,000 for the ship, which would be typical. In 1971, Pine Island was towed to Bremerton to be stripped out by the Navy, which is not uncommon for a ship to be scrapped. The fact that she, nor the other AVs, is not listed on the Naval Vessel Register is strange, but probably just an oversight on the Navy's part, as is not uncommon. Should you email the nice folks running the NVR today, they would probably thank you for pointing out the omission and add the missing ships. Now, all this is not a refutation of Operation High Jump. That would be left to others. So, the missing ship may have been scrapped in 1972, but the story, of course, gets stranger still. The Pine Island was not the only ship involved in the Antarctic research or exploration to have disappeared. There were numerous others. The question is not so much how many. That is fairly established. The question is how and why, particularly why. On March 15, 1947, the El Mercurio, the newspaper of Santiago, Chile, had a headline article on board the Mount Olympus on the high seas, which quoted Byrd in an interview with Lee Van Atta. Admiral Byrd declared today that it was imperative for the United States to initiate immediate defense measures against hostile regions. Furthermore, Byrd stated that he didn't want to frighten anyone unduly, but that there was a bitter reality that in the case of a new war, the continental United States would be attacked by flying objects which could fly from pole to pole at incredible speeds. Interestingly, not long before he made these comments, the Admiral had recommended defense bases at the North Pole. These were not isolated remarks. Admiral Byrd later repeated to each of these points of view, resulting from he described as his personal knowledge, gathered both of the North and South Poles before a news conference held for an international news service. He was hospitalized and was not allowed to hold any more press conferences. Still, in March of 1955, he was placed in charge of Operation Deep Freeze, which was part of the International Geophysical Year 1957-1958 exploration of the Antarctic. He died shortly thereafter, in 1957, and many suggested he was murdered.
Sounds like they tried to kill him the first time. He's trying to speak out and also know he's taken too ill to. They probably put something in his food.
That's possible. It's possible.
Especially back then. That's how they used to roll. Can't prove anything back in the day.
That's a good point. It would have been very difficult to prove.
Yeah, I mean, think that's back in the microfiche days. Like the first 4 James Bond movies. Think about that.
So, who was this enemy that owned or flew these flying objects? Germany was apparently defeated, and there was no evidence that the newly emerging enemy Russia certainly had superior technologies. They were, like the United States, on the verge of the rocket age and totally depending on technology and expertise captured from Germany. There was no other known threat that could account for the United States' invasion of Antarctica, nor for the development of any craft that could fly from pole to pole with incredible speeds. Of course, the Roswell incident had been in the news the past summer, but it had been officially explained and hushed up by the time high jump began. Rumors began to circulate that even though Germany had been defeated, a selection of military personnel and scientists had fled the fatherland as Allied troops swept across mainland Europe and established themselves in a base on Antarctica, from where they continued to develop advanced aircraft based on extraterrestrial technologies. It is interesting to note that at the end of the war, the Allies determined there were 250,000 Germans unaccounted for, even taking into account casualties and deaths. This would be quite a population base for a fledgling colony, and provide the essential degree of skill, expertise, and pure manpower from an industrial base of any sort, let alone the production of, even by today's standards, extremely high technology. All unidentified flying object researchers are, of course, aware of the multitude of reports concerning sightings of flying saucers with the insignia of the Reich or iron crosses on them, aliens speaking German, etc. Most have also heard of abductions who have been taken to underground bases with these offensive emblems on the walls, or as can be seen in the case of the noted abductee Alex Christopher, to have seen reptiloids and Germans working together aboard anti-gravity craft or within underground bases. Barney Hill was apparently not the only one to describe these so-called German connections to unidentified flying abductions. However, reports such as Christopher's and Hill's must be taken with a rather large grain of salt. There is far more plausible explanations than so-called reptiloids. Another noted example is the American Reinhold Schmidt, a man whose father was born in Germany and who tells in his book Incident at Kearney that he was taken on a flying saucer on several occasions. Schmidt states that the crew spoke German and acted like German soldiers. He also stated they took him to the polar region. Now, one must admit, if a person were making up such a story, why would they claim to be taken of all places to the pole? Of course, one must realize that at the time of Schmidt's comments, the rumors of a secret German base at the poles were already fairly common. After returning, he was allegedly subjected to persecution by the U.S. government. In his defense, it must be noted the description of the aerial discs, as he called them, matched pictures captured from Germans in the final days of the Second World War. In 1959, 3 large newspapers in Chile reported front-page articles about unidentified flying object encounters in which the crew members appeared to be German soldiers. In the early 1960s, there were reports in New York and New Jersey of flying saucer aliens who spoke German or English with a German accent. Nor can it be neglected to mention that one of the most spectacular legal cases of the 20th century, the atomic espionage trials of Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, spoke of warships of space. Since they had access to top secret information and at that point no reason to lie, what was it exactly that they meant? So now we get on to the point. In late 1947, only months after the famous Roswell incident, the Secretary of the Navy, James Forstall, sent a naval task force to Antarctica, including Admiral Nimitz, Admiral Curson, and Admiral Byrd, called Operation High Jump. It was touted to be an expedition to find coal deposits or other valuable resources, but the facts indicate otherwise. In actuality, they were apparently trying to locate the immense underground bases constructed by the Germans before, during, and immediately after the Second World War, with the aid of alien entities, which were described as the Aryans. This base was allegedly located in New Schwabenland, an area of Antarctica which Germany explored and claimed before the outbreak of the Second World War. In fact, Germany had done a very detailed study of the Antarctic and were alleged to have built a small underground base there before the war. At this point, one might ask why. Exactly. The United States, and in fact her allies, suspected the German activity at the poles was continuing after the conclusion of the Second World War. The answer, quite honestly, has nothing to do at all with unidentified flying objects. That part of the story came to light from a completely different set of sources. The fact is, there was plenty evidence at the time to indicate that as late as 1947, elements of the Kriegsmarine, or German Navy, were still very much active in South Atlantic, operating either out of South America or some base previously unsuspected in the Arctic. Many stories were circulating at the time, one of which even had German U-boats stopping an Icelandic whaler named Juliana in the Antarctic waters in 1947, and insisting that its captain, named Hekla, send the U-boat crews supplies from her available stores. In exchange for supplies, which had been paid for in US dollars, along with $10 bonus to each member of the Juliana's crew, the U-boat commander told the whaler where a large school of whales were to be found. Hekla and his crew later found the whales in the exact position claimed by the U-boat commander. The presence of such boats, all late construction Type 21 and 23 U-boats, with a snorkel that allowed them to make the entire passage from Germany submerged, was no secret. Many were thought to be operating out of Argentina, possibly under the Argentinian flag, but crewed by German crew. The fact is that in the dying moments of the Second World War, 10 U-boats based in Oslo Fjord, Hamburg, and Flensburg were made available to transport several hundred German officers and officials to Argentina to found a new Reich, which is widely accepted. These officers, most involved in secret projects, and many of whom were members of the secret police and German Navy itself, sought to escape the vengeance of the Allies and continue their work abroad. The U-boats were filled with their luggage, documents, and more than likely gold bullion to finance their efforts. All the U-boats departed their home ports between 3rd and 8th of May 1945. They proceeded to Argentina, where they would be welcomed by the friendly regime of Juan Perón and his charismatic wife Eva Perón. 7 of the 10 U-boats based in the German-Danish border set off for Argentina. Through the Kattegat and Skagerrak, none were ever seen again officially. It has been, however, documented that 3 of the boats did in fact arrive in Argentina. These were U-530, U-977, U-1238. U-530 and U-977 surrendered to the Argentine Navy at Mar del Plata in early July and August of 1945. U-1238 was scuttled by her crew in the waters of San Miradas Gulf off of northern Patagonia. 7 boats are yet as unaccounted for, and German Navy archives recently discovered indicate that a total of more than 40 boats are completely unaccounted for, all which were of late construction, state-of-the-art craft, and could have made either the Argentina or Antarctic simply completely submerged and completely unnoticed by existing Allied technology at the time for the entire duration of their crossing. The question arises, of course, why these men would make such a perilous crossing. It must surely be seen as an act of either desperation or fanaticism, or both, as such men are crewed U-boats were neither, nor were the scientists and military officers who were their passengers. The fact is, it would seem that most of those who fled the ruins of Germany to the far south were scientists and engineers, and their dedication sprang from the project on which they were working. To understand this dedication, it is necessary to go back before the outbreak of the Second World War to an isolated section of the Bavarian Alps. It was there in the summer of 1938 that an unidentified flying object, crewed by a distinctly human and Caucasian-appearing race, made a forced landing, very similar to one which was to occur some 10 years later in the deserts of New Mexico in the United States. While the occupants of the craft were completely unrelated, the technology involved seems to have been strikingly similar. Also, the outcome of that recovery effort, undertaken by Germany, just as a similar recovery effort was taken by the United States, had strikingly different results. The Bavarian crash in 1938 seemed to have yielded a functioning or almost functional and repairable, with the technology of the time, power plant, and a nearly completely destroyed or unrepairable airframe. The Roswell crash resulted in exactly the opposite, a nearly intact airframe and a ruined power plant. Because of this, the German research which was to follow took a vastly different turn from that which was undertaken in the United States. Some 10 years later, Germany needed an airframe which was capable of supporting the engine, for lack of a better term. while the United States would eventually need an engine capable of giving max performance to the airframe. This, of course, would explain the vast array of experimental aircraft of extremely unique design to literally pour out of the design bureaus of the Messerschmitt, Focke-Wulf, Fokker, and multitudes of smaller firms in the periods between 39 and 45. The most notable, of course, the Flying Wing, which was later copied by the United States and is, of course, the ancestor of today's stealth bomber and fighter designs, notably the B-2 heavy bomber. There's also, beyond doubt, that both unidentified flying object recoveries and the initial impetus for the long-standing and ongoing research into anti-gravity propulsion seen in the work of current aircraft manufacturers, such as Boeing and Lockheed in the United States and Panavia in Europe. In any case, it was the work on reverse engineering that downed the brave and unidentified flying object that was the catalyst for the exodus to the south in the final days of the Second World War. Germany was in ruins, and the research was viewed by those conducting it as vital enough to risk packing up all they had and risking a perilous submerged crossing of the Atlantic to an isolated experimental and research base on a frozen continent. Granted, by modern standards, even the standards of the day, U-boats were small and cramped. They had very little cargo capacity. Still, a tiny fleet of them, 10 to 12 boats, could easily transport the essential equipment, making several runs and serve to supply and later resupply the Antarctic bastion of the research. Speculation exists, but not much to support it, that at least one of the boats in the valiant little fleet contained the biggest prize of all, at least one living survivor of the 1938 crash, an extraterrestrial, a literal human being, not a gray born on a distant planet. The best evidence indicates that there were several survivors of the crash and that they worked, and they are most likely still working, with the original German scientists and engineers or their descendants in an effort to construct a viable flying disc. These are not the gray aliens of Roswell. These beings, biologically completely human, are described as Aryan in appearance and completely human, although at least 2 to 3 generations more advanced technology than Earth-born human beings. While their technology is similar to that of the Greys in general theory, it is somewhat different apparently in application. This would tend to indicate that Earth technology and science is, at most, only one major breakthrough away from partiality with the extraterrestrial cultures in question, and also explains the urgency of the project as viewed by the Germans and undoubtedly the United States as well, the scientists and engineers involved in such research. In any case, Operation High Jump began. The task force of over 40 ships, including the flagship Mount Olympus, the aircraft carrier Philippine Sea, and the seaplane tender Pine Sea, and the submarine Senate, the destroyer Bronson, the icebreaker Northwind, and other tanker and supply ships, an armed contingent of 1,400 sailors, and 3 dog sled teams were also on board. The expedition was filmed by the Navy and brought to Hollywood to make into a commercial film called The Secret Land. It was narrated by Hollywood actor Robert Montgomery, father of Bewitched star Elizabeth Montgomery, who was himself an officer in the Naval Reserve. It seems incredible that so shortly after the war had decimated most of Europe and crippled global economies, an expedition to Antarctica was undertaken with so much haste. It took advantage of the first Antarctic summer after the war at such a cost, with so much military hardware, unless the operation was absolutely essential to the security of the United States. At a time, the U.S. Navy itself was being taken apart piece by piece as the battle-tested fleet was decommissioned, with most of its civilian crew bidding farewell to the seas forever. The Navy was even reduced to further recruitment to man the few remaining ships in service. Tensions across the globe were also mounting as Russia and America edged into a Cold War, possibly a third world war that the U.S. would have to fight with tragically few ships and tragically half-trained men. This made the sending of nearly 5,000 residual Navy personnel to a remote part of the planet where so much danger lurked in the form of icebergs, blizzards, and sub-zero temperatures even more of a puzzle. The operation was also launched with incredible speed, within a matter of weeks. Perhaps it was not to be uncharitable to conclude that the Americans had some unfinished business connected with the war in the polar regions. Indeed, this was later confirmed by other events and operation leader Admiral Richard Byrd himself. The official instructions issued by the then Chief of Naval Operations Chester W. Nimitz were to train personnel and test material in the frigid zones, to consolidate and extend American sovereignty over the largest practical area of the Antarctic continent, to determine the feasibility of establishing and maintaining bases in the Antarctic and to investigate possible base sites, to develop techniques for establishing and maintaining air bases on the ice, with particular attention to the later application of such techniques to Greenland, and to amplify existing knowledge of hydrographic, geographic, geological, meteorological, and electromagnetic conditions in the area. Little other information was released to the media about the mission, although most journalists were suspicious of its true purpose, given the huge amount of military hardware involved. The U.S. Navy also strongly emphasized that Operation High Jump was going to be a Navy show. Admiral Ramsey's preliminary orders of 26 August 1946 state that the Chief of Naval Operations only will deal with other governmental agencies.
It wasn't until like the 60s that they said that no one could own Antarctica, right?
1959.
1959. All right.
Yeah. But no diplomatic negotiations were required, no foreign observers would be accepted, and not exactly an invitation to scrutiny, even for other arms of the government. Some facts, however, are well known. There were 3 divisions of Operation High Jump. One for land group with tractors, explosives, and plenty of equipment to refurbish Little America and make an airstrip to land the 6 R-4Ds or DC-3s and 2 seaplane groups. The R-4Ds were fitted with jet assist takeoff bottles, JATO, in order to take off from the short runway of the aircraft carrier Philippine Sea. They're also fitted with large skis for landing on the ice field prepared for them. These skis were specifically fitted at 3 inches above the surface of the carrier deck. When landing on ice at Little America, 3 inches of tire in contact with the snow and ice provided just enough and not too much drag for a smooth landing. Following its arrival in Antarctica, the force began a reconnaissance of the continent. Byrd himself was on board the first of the planes to take off on January 29, 1947. Rocket propulsion tubes had been attached to the side of the aircraft, and the carrier was maneuvered for a 35-mile-per-hour run to get the planes airborne. From the vibration of the great carrier, Byrd later wrote, "I knew when the captain got the ship up to about 30 knots, that's 35 miles per hour, maximum, full emergency speed for such a vessel. We seemed to creep along the deck at first, and it looked as if we would never make it. But when our 4 JATO bottles went off along the sides of the plane with terrific deafening noise, I could see the deck fall away and knew we had made it." Admiral Byrd's team of 6 R-4Ds were fitted with the then super-secret Trimterracon spy cameras, and each plane was trailing a magnometer. The aircraft flew over much of the continent as they could in the short 3-month summer period, mapping and recording magnetic data. They also carried magnetometers showing anomalies in the Earth's magnetism, i.e., if there was a hollow place under the surface, ice or ground, it will show up immediately. One of the last of many mapping flights where all 6 planes went out, each on a certain preordained path to film and measure with magnometers. Admiral Byrd's plane returned 3 hours late. Officially, it was stated he had lost an engine and had to throw everything overboard except the films themselves and the results of the magnetometer readings in order to maintain altitude long enough to return to Little America. We are to believe the published and private accounts of what actually took place. It is almost certain the time when he met with representatives of the extraterrestrial and the contingent of German scientists working on reverse engineering and construction flying discs. Over the next 4 weeks, the plane spent 220 hours in the air, flying a total of 22,700 miles and taking some 70,000 aerial photographs. The mission that's been expected to last for between 6 to 8 months came to an end and faltering end. The Chilean press reported the mission had run into trouble, and there had been many fatalities. However, the official record states that 1 plane crashed, killing 3 men, a 4th man had perished on the ice, 2 helicopters had gone down, although the crew had been rescued, and a task force commander was nearly lost. It is indisputable fact that the central group of Operation High Jump were evacuated by the Burton Island icebreaker from the Bay of Whales on the 22nd February 1947. The Western group headed home on the 1st of March 1947, and the Eastern group did likewise on the 4th of March, a mere 8 weeks after arrival. In the end, the task force came streaming back to the United States with their data, which then immediately became classified top secret. Secretary of the Navy, by this time Secretary of Defense James Forrestal, retired and started to talk, not only about high jump, but about other things as well. He was put in Bethesda Naval Hospital psychiatric ward, where he was prevented from seeing or talking to anyone, including his wife, and after a short while he was thrown out a window while trying to hang himself with a bedsheet. So the story goes, it was, of course, ruled a suicide, case closed. However, some of what he knew about high jump, about Roswell, about other things did manage to leak. How much is truth and how much is speculation is difficult to tell. However, in every myth there is a grain of truth. This much is certain. As incredible as it may sound, there is considerable supporting evidence for these claims about a German base in Antarctica. On the very eve of the Second World War, the Germans themselves had invaded part of Antarctica and claimed it for the Third Reich. In fact, the Fuhrer himself had authorized several expeditions to the poles shortly before World War II. Their stated objective was to either rebuild and enlarge Germany's whaling fleet or test out weaponry in several severely hostile conditions. Yet if true, all this could have been achieved at the North Pole rather than at both poles, and had been much closer to home. For some reason, however, the Germans had long held an interest in the South Pole region of Antarctica, with the first Germanic research base of that area being undertaken in 1873, when Sir Edward Dahlmann, who lived from 1830 to 1896, discovered new Antarctic routes in the Kaiser Wilhelm Inseln at the western entrance of the Bismarckstraße along the Biscay Islands with his ship Grönland during his expedition for the German Polar Navigation Company of Hamburg. The Grönland also achieved the distinction of being the first steamer to operate in the Southern Ocean. Further expeditions took place in the early years of the 20th century in the ship the Gauss, which became embedded in the ice for 12 months. And then a further expedition took place in 1911 under the command of William Flexner with his ship, the Deutschland. Between the wars, the Germans made a further voyage in 1925 with a specifically designed ship for the polar regions, the Meteor, under the command of Dr. Albert Mertz. Then, in early years preceding the Second War, the Germans laid claim to parts of Antarctica in order to set up permanent bases there. Given that no country actually owned the continent and could not exactly be conquered, as no one lived there during the winter months at least, it appeared to the Germans that the most effective way to conquer part of the continent was to physically travel there, claim it, let others know of their actions, and await any disagreements. Captain Alfred Richter, who was chosen to lead the proposed strike, had already led expeditions to the North Pole and had proven himself in advance and versed in critical situations. For the mission, Richter was given the Schwabenland, a German aircraft carrier that had been used for transatlantic mail deliveries by special flight boats, and a famous 10-ton Dorner super walls since 1934. These walls were launched by catapult from the Schwabenland and had been accelerated to 93 miles an hour before they could become airborne. At the end of each flight, a crane on the ship lifted the aircraft back on board after they landed in the sea. The ship was refitted for the expedition in the shipyards of Hamburg, and at around 1 million Reichsmarks, nearly a third of the entire expedition budget was spent on this refit alone. The crew was prepared for the mission by the German Society of Polar Research, and these preparations near completion, the organization invited Admiral Byrd to address them, which he did. The Schwabenland left the port of Hamburg on 17 December 1938 and followed a precisely planned and determined route towards the southern continent. In a little over a month, the ship arrived at the ice-covered Antarctic, dropping anchor at 40B, 30B west, 69B, 014B south on January 20, 1939. The expedition was spent 3 weeks off the Princess Astrid coast and Princess Martha coast off of Queen Maud Land. During these weeks, 2 Schwabenland aircraft, the Passat and the Boris, flew 15 missions across some 600,000 square kilometers, taking more than 11,000 pictures of the area with their specially designed Zeiss Rheinheim-Mess Balkan Markers RMK-38B. Nearly 1/5 of Antarctica was reconned in this way. For the first time, ice-free areas with lakes and sign of vegetations were discovered. These areas were then declared to be under the control of the German expedition, renamed New Schwabenland, and hundreds of small stakes carrying the German insignia were dumped into the snow-covered ground from the walls to signal new ownership. Richter and the Schwabenland left their newly claimed territory in the middle of February 1939 and returned to Hamburg 2 months later, complete with their photographs and maps of the new German acquisition. Now bear in mind, all of this took place before the recovery of the unidentified flying object in the Bavarian Alps in 1938. There's no conceivable reason, at least on the surface, for such an intense interest in the South Pole regions, unless something else had already transpired to make such an investigation worthwhile. The true purpose of this investigation has never been satisfactorily explained. There's merely a series of puzzles, related reports, and snippets of information that are no longer open to verification. What is not open to doubt, however, is that a decade preceding the Second World War, the Germans did almost nothing that did not put the entire structure of their country on a war footing. This activity affected all aspects of German life: military, civilian, economic, social, and foreign policies, engineering, industry, etc. Given that the seizing of New Schwabenland occurred on the very eve of the war, it can only be concluded that the Polar Expedition was of major importance and significance to the goals and development of the German nation. Nor did activity end with the outbreak of the war. In fact, it intensified. The South Atlantic, including the South Polar waters, became quite active.
They had some crazy plans. Tiny ass country.
Indeed.
Starting all this shit.
This is some really detailed information. I'm very happy with this.
Could you really imagine though that, like, you know, back in the day, what is this now, 80 years ago, Germany is going to Antarctica. It's just bizarre. There's no one there. They're a small country. They're worried about trying to fight this crazy war they started. And they're sending guys to Antarctica, where there's no one there.
Gotta be a reason, huh?
Yeah, right?
It's always love on all this stuff.
Now, let me take this opportunity to grab a couple of super chats I got here real quick. Red Monarch for $2. Thank you, Red Monarch. Much appreciated. Good evening, Pete, Tina, Jesse, Mecca, Creepers. Ho! Thank you, Red Monarch. Much appreciated. A Red Monarch with a little sticker here for 99 cents. It's a guy with his mouth open and he's drooling and his eyes are very wide. Thank you very much, Red Monarch. I do appreciate that. Very nice of you. Thank you. Hope you're doing well today.
Also like that you covered that we had the chassis and they had the engine, so we needed the German scientists.
Yeah, yeah, and that's really what appears to be the case. You know, they were able to, and they were dealing with a different group of aliens too. And this, if you know anything about the Real Maidens and Maria Orsic and that whole crazy story, they were in contact with these like Nordic aliens, while the Greys had crashed over here in Roswell. So they were working hand in hand with these aliens. So who knows what was going on there to begin with. But there was something down there they were going for before the war even happened.
Yeah. It has to be. And that treaty is like the oldest treaty standing to date, isn't it?
I don't believe so.
No? No?
No, 1959, the oldest standing treaty.
Yeah.
No. So, the Atlantis is known to have been visited by the RFZ-2, a UFO-style craft which has served as a reconnaissance aircraft since the late 1940s. The ship then adopted a new disguise as Tennessee before being sunk by the HMS Devonshire near Ascension Island on the 22nd November 1944. The Atlantis was also known as Hifsgerserker 16 and was at various times distinguished as the Costume Maroon or the Abelkau. Although the activities of the German ship Arlegon under the captaincy of Alfred Gams did not appear to be of consequence during 1939 and 1940, the same cannot be said of the Comet, which was commanded by Captain Robert Estes. Following her passage along the Northern Sea Route in 1940, the commenced raider operated in the Pacific and Indian Oceans, including the voyage along the Atlantic coastline from Cape Adair to the Shackleton Ice Shelf in search of whaling vessels during February 1941. There she met the Penguin and supply vessel Alistair and the Adjuncte. The Comet was sunk off Cherbourg in 1942. The Penguin, itself under the command of Captain Ernest Felix Kruger, was a commerce raider that operated chiefly in the Indian Ocean. In January 41, she captained the Norwegian whaling fleet, battery ship Olweger and Plegados, supply ship Solgrimid, and 11 whale catchers, and about 59B0 south, 02B030 west. One of these catches, renamed the Arjutant, remained as a tender, and the rest were sent to France. This ship also made anchorages that lies in Kurligan and may have landed with the party on Burana Island. The Penguin was sunk in the Persian Gulf by the HMS Cornwall on May 8, 1941, after she had captured 136,550 tons of British and Allied shipping. The island of Kerguelen, named the most useless island in the world in 1995, continued to feature prominently in German plans. For example, in 1942, the German Navy planned to establish a meteorological station. In May of that year, the ship Michael transferred a meteorologist and 2 radio operators with full equipment to the supply vessel Charlotte Schulman and went onto the island. However, the orders for the station were later countermanded. It's interesting to note, this island was also the center of a mid-19th century mystery. then entirely uninhabited, except for seals and seabirds. British Captain Sir James Clark Ross landed there in May of 1840. He found in the snow unidentifiable traces of the singular footprints of a pony or ass, being 3 inches in length and 2 inches in breadth, having a small, deep depression on either side and shaped like a horseshoe. Similar markings appeared overnight in the Devon area of England 15 years later and have also defied adequate explanation. Then in 1942, Captain Gerlach and his ship the Seister investigated nearby Goog Island and a possible temporary base for raiders and a camp for prisoners. Ship activity does not appear considerable. However, the level of U-boat activity in the South Atlantic was much higher. The exact nature and extent of how high was probably never be known. However, some insight might be gleaned from the fact that between October 1942 and September 1944, 16 German U-boats were sunk in the South Atlantic area. Some of these submarines appear to be engaged in covert activities. A final example of this would be that of the U-859, which on 4th April 1944 at 40:40 hours, 0440 hours, left on a mission carrying 67 men and 33 tons of mercury sealed in glass bottles and airtight tin crates. The submarine was later sunk on the 23rd of September by a British submarine in the Straits of Malacca, and although 47 of the crew died, 20 survived. Some 30 years later, one of these survivors spoke openly about the cargo, and divers later confirmed the story on rediscovering the mercury. The significance being the mercury is usable as a fuel source for certain types of aerospace propulsion. Why would a German submarine be transporting such a cargo so far from home? It is not odd at all if one considers the fact that aviation aeronautics construction is what the polar base seems to be all about. Although Germany surrendered unconditionally to the Allies on May 8, 1945, events that date suggest something was happening that did not form part of the recognized world history. Something fueled by statements made by German Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz, the commandeer of the German Navy, 31st January 43, and led the German U-boat fleet to the Atlantic Sea. He also had the distinction of briefly becoming head of the German state for 20 days after the bad guy's death, until his own capture by the Allies on May 23, 1945. His contribution to the mystery of post-war Antarctic activity came in a statement he made in 1943, when he declared that a substantial portion of the German submarine fleet had been rebuilt in another part of the world, a Shangri-La land, an impregnable fortress. Could he have been referring to the alleged base in Antarctica? I don't know. I don't know, folks. We're not dealing with some heavy stuff here tonight. Yeah, okay, whatever, bro, for $5. Thank you very much. Yeah, okay, whatever, bro. Yeah, okay, whatever, bro says. I hope you get into the supposed journals that belong to Bird. Yeah, we're gonna get into all that. Let me see what time it is. Yeah. I hope we get into that.
With the phrasing of that, it makes me think it could be a Hollow Earth reference.
It very well could be.
You say he had enough for 2 shows?
I'm sure he does. 3.
Yeah, let me see.
Sorry, Jesse interrupted.
Yeah, I probably got enough for 2 shows there.
Don't stop, though. Not yet.
Oh my god.
Everybody all
I'm
right?
just digging.
Yeah, I'm just chilling and listening to the story.
Yeah. I'm trying to mute so I'm not like smash. The keyboard, you know? You know how that goes.
I was muting because my cat was eating cat food.
Cat. Loudest eating cat on the planet.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah, juicy stuff, Pete.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, certainly there are records of continued German naval activity in the area after the war had apparently ended. For example, on 10 July 1945, more than 2 months after the cessation of known hostilities, the German submarine U-530 surrendered to Argentine authorities. The background of this event is puzzling. It was known the boat had left Lorient in France on the 22nd of May 1944 under the captaincy of Otto Wermuth for operations in the Trinidad area. And after successfully rendezvousing with the incoming Japanese submarine I-52, it headed for Trinidad before finally returning to base after 133 days at sea. The boat's official record states that between October 44 and May 45, it formed part of the 33rd Flotilla. On the German surrender, Otto Wermuth's captaincy and the submarine's career came to an end. Yet 2 months later, it arrived in Rio de la Plata in Argentina and surrendered to the authorities there on 10th July 1945. The future may well reveal the fate of more of these submarines. However, given the French and South American reports and the number of missing U-boats, it may not be unreasonable to conclude that at least some of them relocated to the South Pole area. History also gives us further clues as to the German Antarctica connection, for it records that Hans Ulrich Rudel of the German Luftwaffe was being groomed to be the successor to the big bad guy. It is also known that Rudel made frequent trips to Tierra del Fuego at the tip of South America nearest Antarctica, and one of Martin Boseman's last messages from the bunker in Berlin to Donitz also mentioned Tierra del Fuego. Then there also are claims about Rudolf Hess, who went to England and was arrested as a war criminal on May 10, 1941. Following his arrest, he was held in Spandau prison in isolation until his death. Such unique treatment is suggestive that he had information the Allies considered dangerous. Indeed, in his book, Christoph Fletcher states, Hess was entrusted with all important Antarctic file. Hess himself kept the polar file. Now granted, such information as he possessed, if any, would have been complete only to the time he took off on his solo flight to England, but that period prior to 1941 would have covered the initial recovery of the Bavarian flying disc, at the very least the early stages of any project or projects arising from such recovery. It would also contain any information with regard to any survivors of the crash and their eventual fates. Many believe that he, who had no part in any of the so-called war crimes, was deliberately kept at Spandau prison for life in an attempt to keep him quiet. It's also been speculated the man who died in Spandau prison was in fact not Hess at all, that Hess had been murdered years before in effect to keep the truth on several highly embarrassing matters from getting out. In that moment, however, let's return to Operation High Jump, which seems to have been an attempt to ferret out the remaining German base in the Antarctic continent, and perhaps to determine where exactly the sudden rash of unidentified flying object activity of the past 18 months had originated, and exactly who or what was behind it. There would have, of necessity, been two prerequisites for a mission of this type. Firstly, Operation High Jump would have to provide evidence that the mission included a reconnaissance in New Schwabenland, and secondly, there would have to be an area of the frozen continent that could allow such a base to exist throughout the year. Both of these criteria were met. Both the eastern and western groups of Operation High Jump had been active around New Schwabenland, so it was a Russian boat that proved to be unfriendly. The eastern group were frustrated in their efforts to make a reconnaissance of the area, despite incredible efforts to secure photographs for later examination. However, by then it was very late in the season. The sun had only been briefly glimpsed in the past few weeks, but everyone could tell the continually gray skies and clouds were darkening daily. In another month, all the light would be gone from Antarctica. The waters grinding the continent would begin to freeze rapidly, binding unwary ships in a crushing embrace. De Furet, the commander, was loath to surrender. He ordered his ships northwards away from the pack. Perhaps one or two more flights might be possible, but on the morning of 3rd March, virgin ice was seen to be forming on the water's surface, and the eastern group steamed out of Antarctica. The western group, however, were to make a remarkable discovery. At the end of January 1947, a PMB piloted by Lieutenant Commander David Bunger of Colorado, California, flew from his ship, Caratucket, and headed towards the continent, Queen Mary's coast. On reaching land, Bunger flew west for a time, then coming up over a featureless white horizon, he saw a dark, bare area which Byrd later described as a land of blue and green lakes and brown hills and an otherwise limitless expanse of ice. Bunger and his men carefully reconned the area before racing back to Caratucket with news of their find. The oasis had been discovered, covering an area of some 300 square miles of the continent, and contained 3 large open water lakes along with a number of smaller lakes. These lakes were separated by masses of barren, reddish-brown rock, possibly indicating the presence of iron ore. Several days later, Bunger returned to the area and found the water was warm to the touch, and the lake itself was filled with red, blue, and green algae, giving it a distinct color. Bunger filled a bottle with the water, which later turned out to be brackish, a clue to the fact that the lake was actually an arm of the open sea. This is important for 2 reasons. Warm inland lakes connected to the surrounding oceans would be perfect for submarines to hide within, and similar lakes have been noted in New Schwabenland, the site of the alleged German and suspected alien base. While there is still no conclusive evidence of the German alien base on Antarctica, it is beyond doubt that something highly unusual was happening on or around the frozen continent. In general, it appears the probability for such a base to have existed, and possibly still continues to exist to this day, are rather high. The evidence, a large volume of it, is there for all to see. The Germans explored and claimed part of Antarctica on the very eve of the war, when the vast majority of their activity was geared towards the rebuilding of the German economy and military infrastructure. This activity began shortly before the recovery of the Bavarian flying disc in 1938, but it picked up pace immediately afterwards. There was ongoing ship and submarine activity in the South Atlantic and polar regions throughout and after the war had apparently ended. This activity continued well into the 1950s, and if some accounts are to be believed, continues to this day, with what can only be considered U-boat sightings, and a very high incident of unidentified flying object sightings in the South Atlantic and solar polar regions, including the southern portions of South America. The U.S. literally invaded the continent of Antarctica itself with considerable naval resources, leaving mainland America exposed and vulnerable as the world edged into the Cold War. The task force limped home as if defeated only weeks later, and the local South American press wrote of such a defeat. This coincided with a substantial increase in unidentified flying object activity, generally attributed to the first major wave of such activity in modern times, with an ornate amount of this activity taking place in the southern hemisphere, particularly in South America. Admiral Byrd spoke of objects that could fly from pole to pole at incredible speeds being based on Antarctica, and hundreds of thousands of Germans and minimum of 40 U-boats were missing at the end of the war. Documentation and eyewitness accounts prove that at least a portion of these crafts made it as far as South America, in some cases several months after the end of the war in Europe. So let's discuss for a moment, because I need to refresh my word here. Looks like Bevelburn says, imagine if they lived there 3 years and had their own unique Antarctic German dialect. You could imagine that. That really would make a lot of sense. You know, who knows what they would sound like after so much time down there. We're talking a couple generations. You know.
Well, look at how accents shift too.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
look at the American Southern accent. Just as like is kind of like what happens when, you know, people lose their British accents a little bit. So
Yeah, everybody has accents, I think. Even like in every language they have accents.
oh yeah,
You know what I mean?
oh yeah, absolutely. So how plausible though is it for people to live down there like long term without
Very
a
plausible.
Depends on what they have. Like, my big question is, why do the aliens like the Nazis so much?
I don't know. Maybe they're the
The
first ones to
opposite
figure out how
way.
to talk to them.
Yeah.
I mean, they were into all kinds of shit.
Well, you know what? Cold emotionless alien, cold emotionless and easy.
Well, I mean, you're not wrong there. I mean, you're not wrong though. Like my family is very has a lot of Germanic background to it, and yeah, you are pretty. You're not really not a huggy sort of people. The Germans.
Huggy.
Or gossip either.
No, it makes some other things make sense, because Germany is such a small country, and I think that it could have taken on the world.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of ridiculous to think about that for a minute, isn't it?
Mm. Well, who would have the balls to do that nowadays?
Zealots.
That's true.
But then again, they were zealots.
Crazy fucking people.
Mm-hmm. But hey, we won this country with the help of France. Maybe they were trying to win with the aid of aliens.
Yeah, why not? Aliens are cool.
Then we reminded them that we're America, and aliens should stay away. The nuclear fucking aliens.
America versus the aliens.
Look, I seen Independence Day. I know how this one goes already.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. It's totally factual account. You just take their ship, you fly it up there with the nuke, and you just leave it there in the mothership. Done deal.
So, the connection between Antarctica and the UFO phenomenon was sealed with claims made by one Albert K. Bender, who stated that he went into the fantastic and came up with an answer, I don't know what the saucers are. Bender ran an organization called the International Flying Saucer Bureau, a small UFO organization based in Connecticut, USA. He also edited a publication known as the Space Review, which was committed to dissemination of news about UFOs. In truth, the organization only had a small membership, and the publication circulated amongst hundreds rather than thousands. But that its members and readers valued it was little in doubt. The publication itself advocated that flying saucers were spacecraft of extraterrestrial origin. However, in the October 1953 edition of Space Review, there were two major announcements. The first was headed Late Bulletin and stated, a source which the International Flying Saucer Bureau considers very reliable has informed us that the investigation of the flying saucer mystery and the solution is approaching final stages. This same source to whom we had referred data which had come into our possession suggested that it was not the proper method and time to publish the data in Space Review. A second announcement read, Statement of Importance. The mystery of the flying saucer is no longer a mystery. The source is already known, but any information about this is being withheld by order from a higher source. We would like to print the full story in Space Review, but because of the nature of the information, we are very sorry that we have been advised in the negative. The statement ended with a sentence. We advise those engaged in saucer work to please be very cautious. These announcements were of little significance in and of themselves. Bender's publication was considered fringe at best, even at the time. However, what gained them wider attention was the fact that immediately after publishing this October 1953 issue, Bender suspended further publications of the magazine and closed IFSB down without any further explanation. It is completely consistent with the prudent approach shown by many who've been gently warned to cease operations by the Majestic 12 Group and other agencies involved in keeping a lid on any real investigation of the unidentified flying object phenomenon. Bender might well have known what the flying saucers were, at least a portion of them, and he later revealed in a local newspaper interview that he was keeping his knowledge a secret following a visit by three men who apparently confirmed he was right about the unidentified flying object theory, but put him in sufficient fear to immediately close down his organization and cease publication of the journal. It has been argued that the story of being visited by three strangers and warned off was a front to close the publication that was losing money. However, the fact that Bender had been scared to death and actually couldn't eat for a couple days was verified by his friends and associates. It's also widely known that such stories are often spread by the United States and other governments to discredit those who might just have the truth or at least a portion of it. In 1963, a full decade after his visit from the three strangers, Bender was seemingly prepared to reveal more of the story in a largely unreadable book entitled Flying Saucers and the Three Men in Black. The book was scant on facts, however. It described extraterrestrial spacecraft that had bases in Antarctica. This was apparently the truth Bender was terrorized not to reveal. Bender was also provided images of the saucers he was aware of. He produced drawings of the unidentified flying objects that he was aware of, not saucers that were commonly depicted at the time, but rather flying wings, which showed three bubble-like protrusions on the underside, reminiscent of the German design Haunuben II, which was allegedly only in the design stage at the end of the Second World War, alongside a cylindrical cigar-shaped object. Ernest Zundel, a German scientist turned author, known for his internet Z-grams, who had entered the U.S. under Operation Paperclip, the United States Army CIA program to bring German scientific talent into the United States in spite of so-called war crimes they were alleged to have committed at the end of the war, and who worked at Wright Field, later Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, where the Roswell debris were eventually housed, also made claims about the nature of activity in Antarctica. In the 1970s,
Hey, stop right there where you read that shit.
Okay.
See, the spacecraft is at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, just like I fucking said. Area 51 is a cover. Why would you put that shit on a coast? You put it in the middle of the country. Make it harder to get to.
In the 1970s, Zundel's book, UFOs, the German Secret Weapons, made the claim that at least some unidentified flying objects were German secret weapons which were developed during the Second World War, and some of them had been shipped out towards the end of the war and hidden at the poles. Publication of the book coincided with a tidal wave of renewed interest in all things paranormal, coming on the heels of what was to be the last major unidentified flying object wave of the 20th century. And Zundel was a guest on countless talk shows where he shared his views on spaceships, free energies, electromagnetism, emergent technologies, and some of the positive contributions made by the Germans in these fields. Zundel, who was one of the first revisionist historians of the Second World War, was actually only interested in promoting his anti-Semitic theories. However, he found that during his UFO, flying objects, and hollow Earth ideas proved greater attraction to television producers.
Did he believe in Jews in space like Mel Brooks?
No, he was a Holocaust denier.
Oh, well, they still have all the hair, so
Yeah.
just go take the tour. It's not hard.
So, so the idea seized hold of the popular imagination, his idea of hollow Earth and UFOs in his other book, and took on a life of its own. His publishing company, Samsat, started to make a name for itself by issuing newsletters and books on the subject. An expedition to Antarctica itself was even proposed to seek out UFO bases there. The fact is that such claims would have died out had they not been based on at least some real events. Now keep in mind that South America has always been a hotbed of unidentified flying object activity. Many of the reports coming from the area are unverified and unverifiable. However, many have credence. The claims that something extremely unusual was taking place around the foreboding reaches of the frozen continent took a major leap forward in the 1960s when the Argentine Navy was charged with the official investigation into strange sightings in the sky. In 1965, official reports prepared by Captain Sanchez Morano of the Naval Air Station Commandant Espora in Bahia Blanca stated that between 1950 and 1965, personnel of Argentina's Navy alone made 22 sightings of an unidentified aircraft that were not airplanes, satellites, weather balloons, or any type of known aerial vehicle. These 22 cases serve as precedents for intensifying the investigations of the subject by the Navy. Following a series of sightings at Argentina and Chilean meteorological stations on Deception Island, Antarctica, in June and July of 1965, Captain Engineer Omar Pagani disclosed at a press conference that unidentified objects do exist. Their presence in Argentine airspace is proven. The report went on to state, however, their nature and origin are unknown and no judgment is made about them. More details of the U.S. UFO sightings were given in a report in the Brazilian newspaper O Estado de São Paulo in the 8th July edition 1965. For the first time in history, an official communique has been published by a government about flying saucers. It's a document from the Argentine Navy based on statements of a large number of Argentine, Chilean, and British sailors stationed in the naval base in Antarctica. The communique declared, the personnel of Deception Island Naval Base saw at 19 hours and 40 minutes on the 3rd of July a flying object of lenticular shape with a solid appearance and a coloring in which red and green prevailed, for a few moments yellow. The machine was flying in zigzag fashion and in a generally western direction, but it changed course several times and changed speeds, having an inclination of about 45 degrees above the horizon. The craft also remained stationary for about 20 minutes at a height of about 5,000 meters, producing no sound. The communique states, moreover, that the prevailing meteorological conditions when the phenomenon was observed can be considered excellent for the region in which the question at the time of the year. The sky was clear and there were a lot of stars visible. The Secretariat of the Argentine Navy also states in this communique the occurrence was witnessed by scientists of 3 naval bases, and the facts described by these people agree completely. Particularly everyone in the UFO community is aware that in March 1950, Commodore Augusto Barca Borgoda of the Chilean Navy shot still pictures and an 8mm movie footage of a very large cigar-shaped flying object that hovered over and maneuvered about in the frigid skies above the Chilean Antarctic. These photos and the reports of Origeo's sightings have quite literally been seen by millions over the half-century since he saw and photographed the objects. He stated, during the bright Antarctic night, we saw flying saucers, one above the other, turning at tremendous speeds. We have photographs to prove what we saw. There have been, of course, numerous other Chilean sightings. During January 1956, another major UFO event was witnessed by a group of Chilean scientists who had been flown by helicopter to Robertson Island in the Wendell Sea to study geology, fauna, and other features. This experience was subject of a later article entitled Cigar-Shaped UFO over Antarctica. At the beginning of January 1956, during a period of stormy weather, the party suddenly became aware of something which, in other circumstances, could have been very grave for them. This was that their radio had mysteriously ceased to function. This was not too worrying a disaster in so much as it firmly settled that the helicopter would return to take them off again on January 20th. One of the scientists, a doctor, was in the habit of getting up in the night to observe anything of meteorological interest, but another of the group, a professor, did not like to be disturbed. However, on the night of January 8, 1956, the doctor decided to wake the professor. He pointed upwards, almost overhead. Still in a bad temper due to being disturbed, the professor looked as directed and beheld 2 metallic, cigar-shaped objects in vertical positions, perfectly still and silent, flashing vividly the reflected rays of the sun. Just after 7 a.m., 2 other members of the party, an assistant and a medical orderly, joined the 2 men. The group watched the 2 craft. At about 9 a.m., Object 1, the nearest to the zenith, suddenly assumed a horizontal posture and shot away like a flash toward the west. It had now lost its metallic brightness and had taken on a whole gamut of visible colors of the spectrum, from infrared to ultraviolet. The report of the sighting went on to say, without slowing down, it performed an incredible acute angle change of directions, shot off across another section of the sky, then did another sharp turn as before. These vertiginous maneuvers, the zigzagging, abrupt stopping, instantaneous accelerations, went on for some time right overhead, the object always following tangential trajectories in respect to the Earth, and all in the most absolute silence. This demonstration lasted about 5 minutes. Then, according to the witnesses, the object returned and took up position beside its companion in almost the same area of the sky as before. Then it was number two's turn to show its paces and do the convoluted zigzagging dance across the sky. Shooting off towards the east, they perform a series of 10 disjointed bursts of flight, broken by abrupt changes of direction and marked by pronounced color changes when accelerating or stopping. After about 3 minutes, Object 2 was observed to resume its station near its companion and return to its original solid and metallic appearance. Due to the nature of their mission, the group had with them 2 Geiger-Miller counters of high sensitivity, and on the one of the auditory and one of the flash type. The 2 objects had finished their dance and resumed their stations in the sky. Someone discovered that the flash-type Geiger counter now showed the radioactivity around them had increased by 40 times, far more than enough to kill any organism subjected long enough to it. This discovery greatly increased the anxiety felt by the 4 men.
Yeah.
Although they had no telescopic lens, they did have cameras with them and managed to take numerous photographs of the object, both in color, black and white. The report does not state what became of these photographs, but it's safe to assume they are in possession of the Chilean government. There's no reason to assume they've ever been shared with that of the United States as well as others. Of course, no names are given of this report, but it has the ring of truth and is consistent with a number of similar sightings. Would that we knew their names. It is only one of the exasperating facts of unidentified flying object research that so many of the South American and South Atlantic sightings are attributed to anonymous sources, where the names of the witnesses involved have been expunged from the official records. So many of these witnesses being cited would, with reference to their stated credentials, credible sources, but because of their practice of expunging names from the records, which might fall into public hands, are practically impossible to trace. The absence of names in many, if most cases, deliberately expunged from official reports, simply lends to an aura of unbelievability, even though it is a common practice, especially in most countries. Yet another documented account of UFO sighting over Antarctica is by Rubens Villela, a meteorologist and the first Brazilian scientist to participate in an expedition in the South Pole region, and now a veteran of 11 expeditions to Antarctica, 2 with the U.S. Navy, 8 with the Brazilian Antarctic program, and another on the sailing ship Rapa Nui. While on board the U.S. Navy icebreaker Glacier, which set sail from New Zealand in the end of January 1961, Villela claims he witnessed a UFO event in the skies over Antarctica, which he immediately recorded in his diary, even including the emotions felt by those involved. On 16 March 1961, after a fierce storm had forced the expedition to retreat to Admiralty Bay in the King George Isles, a straight and sudden light crossed the sky, and everyone started to shout. Speculation went wild. Some thought the object to be an incoming missile. Others thought it to be a meteor. The excitement was widespread and growing. Trying to describe the light which appeared over the Almirante Bay, he told the reporters later, wasn't easy, and I wrote in my diary, positively the colors, the configuration, and contours of the object, as a bodied light with geometric forms, did not seem to be from this world, and I don't know what could possibly reproduce it. The object, he went on to report, was multicolored and had a luminous oval body shape. It left behind a long, tube-like orange-red trail. Allegedly, it split into 2 pieces as if it exploded. Then each part shone more intensively, with white, blue, and red colors projecting V-shaped rays behind it. They quickly moved away and could be seen 200 meters above the ground, according to the witnesses. This entire display was completely silent. The U.S. Navy officially registered the incident as a meteor or some other natural luminous phenomenon, according to the report submitted by the Glacier's captain, Captain Porter. However, this is a common practice and has been ever since the inception of the UFO cover-up, under the auspices of the Majestic 12 group. The policy of official denial and logical explanation, no matter how far-fetched it seemed, has been followed by all branches of the U.S. government since the first days after the Roswell incident in July 1947. It certainly applies to any sightings or alleged sightings in and around Antarctica. Villela, on the other hand, easily dismissed the official line. How could they mistake a meteor with an object carrying an antenna, completely symmetrical, followed by a tail without any slight atmospheric disturbance? According to most official sources, and certainly according to the world-renowned skeptic and self-cited debunker Philip Kloss, this particular episode is a classic example of plasma. However, the late meteorologist James McDonald argued that the highly structured nature of the object and the low cloud overcast presented at 15,000 feet were not compatible with Klaus's hypothesis. The list of sightings in the South Atlantic area is practically endless. It is and has been, particularly since the end of the Second World War, one of the most active areas on Earth with respect to unidentified flying object activity. Another classic sighting took place on January 16, 1958, when the Brazilian naval vessel Almirante Chalanana was escorting a team of scientists to a weather station on Trinidad Island. As the ship approached the island, or rather the outcrop of rock, a UFO reportedly flew low over the water, past the ship, circled the island, and then flew off in front of dozens of witnesses. One of these witnesses to this particular event, an expedition photographer, took a number of photographs of the object. Later, the film was handed over to the military by the captain. Amazingly, after the initial analysis, the Brazilian government released the film, stating they were unable to account for the images. Why did the United States government in late 1947, only months after the famous Roswell incident, send a naval task force to Antarctica, including Admiral Nimitz, Admiral Cruson, and Admiral Byrd, called Operation High Jump? As we observed earlier, the operation was said to be an expedition to find coal deposits or other valuable resources, but the facts indicate otherwise. In actuality, there seems to be no doubt that they were trying to locate an immense underground base constructed by the Germans before, during, and immediately after the Second World War with the aid of alien entities. This base, allegedly located in the area the Germans called New Schwabenland, an area of Antarctica which Germany explored and claimed before the outbreak of the Second World War, was thought to hold flying objects which could fly pole to pole in a matter of minutes. For years, rumors circulated as to why German submarines, U-boats would operate in South America and Antarctic waters long after the end of the Second World War in Europe. Some have said the boats spirited away such notables as Big Bad Guy himself and Martin Bormann, both of whom can be demonstrated to have died at the end of the war. The death and physical remains of both men have been verified beyond doubt, and the latter with very recent DNA testing. Thus, neither of them escaped via U-boats to South America. The fact is, Wolfgang Elsenmenger, a forensic scientist and professor at Munich University, conducted DNA testing of Bormann's remains. He seemed to have done the work for the Frankfurt justice officials. He also had Bormann's dental, medical, and fingerprint records. Bormann's children, or distant family members, details a bit fuzzy, provided the blood for the DNA match, which was proven conclusive, i.e. the body was that of Martin Bormann. The cause of death was seen to be self-inflicted poisoning. The Big Bad Guy, of course, died in his bunker in Berlin of poison and a self-inflicted gunshot. Everyone has heard stories of the vast amounts of gold or other valuables being smuggled out of Germany in the last days of the war, secreted away to South America, to supposed so-called criminals, to support the so-called criminals. So far, none of those stories have shown any sign of merit. If they were so, then men such as Eichmann would not have worked on the assembly line in a Volkswagen plant, Muller would not have run a chicken farm, and Mengele would not have been dependent upon the generosity of his wealthy family. There is a story floating around that this U-boat commander worked on some highly classified U.S. national secrets after the war, and this boat was operating in the far south. He was reported to have been a commander of the VSEC run, or the VSEC-2 U-boat in the Atlantic during the war, named Otto Schneider. This theory is also easy to disprove. There simply was no U-boat commander by that name in the German Navy. Only two commanders with that name saw service in the war. Herbert Schneider, who died while in command of the U-522, and Manfred Schneider, only commanded a small 23 boat, U-4706, for the last 3 months of the war and never left his home port. This story is just a story. The fact is, UFO researchers were well aware of strange sightings of flying saucers with iron crosses and German bad guy symbols. They're also aware of aliens speaking German, and have also heard of abductees who were taken to underground bases with the German emblems on the walls. Or in the case of one abductee, Alex Christopher, who claims to have seen reptiloids and Germans working together aboard anti-gravity craft or within underground bases. Is this what America feared? Is this the secret Antarctic facility whose experiments and developments continue? What Operation High Jump was actually looking for? Is this secret, among others, one that cost James Forstall his life? Did an unrecorded 3-hour-long meeting with a group of German scientists, engineers, and extraterrestrials in the frozen wastelands near the South Pole cost Admiral Byrd his life? Is this the origin of the warships of space that the Rosenbergs mentioned in the very shadow of the electric chair? One thing is certain. The U.S. did not invade Antarctica at the end of the World War in the very beginning of the Cold War, using a disproportionate share of its diminishing fleet for exploration purposes. They were looking for something. They surely knew what it was they were looking for. A scientific expedition does not go forth prepared for war. A map of New Schwabenland that cannot be exhibited in Germany on penalty of imprisonment. A secret U.S. post office operated in Antarctica from 1946 to 1948, causing speculation about the real reason behind the two concurrent U.S. expeditions. Finn Ronan was a Norwegian immigrant who later joined the United States Navy and was a member of an officer in Admiral Byrd's earlier expeditions to Antarctica. From 46 to 48, he led a privately financed expedition to Antarctica following on the heels of Operation High Jump. His expedition was to the Marguerite Bay area, where he reoccupied Byrd's 1939 base. One of the most important results of this expedition was showing the Antarctic Peninsula was connected to the rest of Antarctica, thus solving one of the great public mysteries of the continent. Writing his book, Antarctic Conquest, he stated, although no one knew it, it had been operating in the United States Post Office too, but for reasons of state, emphasis added, it has been completely kept secret. So yeah, secret post office in Antarctica.
So you'd have to have something, just for practicality's sake.
You think they'd use a courier system or something, though? Like they wouldn't just have like a federal sort of post office.
You think there'd be one plane in and out, and that pilot would handle everything.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Part that's kind of like...
Let's know.
I think about flying into Antarctica, I picture kind of like an Indiana Jones movie where you're sitting in the back of a cargo plane.
Yeah. Exactly.
Clutching your parachute with both hands.
Right?
Oh, yeah. There was some horror movie where it was in Antarctica, but when they went outside, they legit showed how bad it was outside, and just getting from one place to the other, it's ridiculous. Just freeze to death out there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they like literally tie like a rope between buildings so they don't get lost, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what they did in the movie. The girl was just trying to carry herself along the rope, and she didn't have the proper clothing on because she was trying to get away from her killer.
Uh-huh.
And yeah, it was brutal looking.
Yeah. It's because like if a blizzard rolls in, you can't see nothing and you get lost quickly. Just a, like a total whiteout. Be terrifying and cold.
Mm-hmm.
System scan complete.
You know, they have those too. I mean, it's not
Just
like-
hold on to the rope and pull.
Follow it. Just hang on to it and follow it to the next building.
That's another reason why my favorite part of this whole thing is the fertile valley of the Savage Land that he was talking about. 300 square miles is pretty damn big.
Yeah.
It ain't too big, but it's pretty damn big. It's good enough for a movie to take place in.
Is it bigger than Vegas? Well, how big is Las Vegas?
I was drunk.
I know. I remember. You don't, but
I remember it was just all blurry.
yeah, I don't remember fucking much of Vegas.
It just looks like a big desert, and then there's a big city in it, so it's hard to tell.
Right?
It's like there's nothing, and we're here.
Yeah, Vegas is only 135.9 square miles, so yeah, it's bigger than Vegas.
2 Vegases.
Pretty
Savage
much,
Land.
yeah. Yep.
Yep, Kazar and Sauron. Excellent issues. Golden age of the X-Men, in my opinion.
Charging.
Slam.
Just talking about the Savage Land.
Good old Savage Land. So
That's my favorite part of this, because you said 300 square miles. It's so big.
4, 3, 2.
pretty big. You got the dinosaurs in there. That would be something else.
Who knows what there would be? It'd be its
Yeah,
own bio.
exactly. Exactly, Jesse.
Got freaking anything living in there. ROUSs? You don't know.
Did they just find an island or something out there recently? Too?
Japan probably built it.
No, some island emerged, I think, like last year or something.
Is it like a real rock one, or is it an ice
I-
patch?
Yeah, I don't know, Jesse. I just remember something about an island. Do you remember that, Pete?
But see, I never noticed.
Oh, okay.
Well, secrecy seems to be in no scarcity as it relates to several Antarctic expeditions, possibly in no small way due to continued concerns that the Germans had a remnant left in Antarctica from their infamous 1938-39 New Schwabenland colonization of Antarctica. The web is abundant with sites setting forth information about suspected and actual German involvement in Antarctica, possibly dating back to even the late 1800s. It does make one wonder if there were in fact covert, or as they say today, black ops reasons for one or more of the Byrd expeditions, including Operation High Jump for this discussion, as well as the private expeditions of Captain Arone. Most online sources are available with information concerning what I have dubbed the Byrd conspiracy, which is not a conspiracy by Admiral Byrd, rather what may have been an apparent conspiracy by the government to keep particular information that he had uncovered during Operation High Jump as a secret. I'm not passing judgment at this time. I'm still investigating the whole thing to my satisfaction. However, lending credence to this conspiracy theory is the observation that Admiral Byrd does in effect seem to disappear from public view shortly after his return from Operation High Jump in 1947, until approximately 1955 when he organized Operation Deep Freeze, and he was reported to have been hospitalized in a mental ward shortly after his return in 1947. This forced hospitalization is said to have come upon the trials of Byrd having made some remarkably candid comments, which included what smacked of being a description of a UFO to a South American newspaper about what he had found during Operation High Jump. His disappearance from the scene after his arrival back in the States would make it appear he may have been promptly squelched. Remember, at this time period, coinciding roughly with the UFO Roswell sightings. Operation High Jump would have been at first early in 1947, and Roswell to follow in the summer of 1947. This was a situation that was the last thing the government would have wanted. Another military official, in this case quite prominent and popular man who had spent years crisscrossing the United States giving lectures, and whose word would have been quite respected and accepted, who apparently reported having seen or believed in UFOs. Contrast this lack of public accessibility after Operation High Jump to the previous well-known availability of Admiral Byrd in the period following his first two Antarctic expeditions, where there were documented items from cities all over the country serving as commemorations where Byrd visited lecturing to the public about his travels in Antarctica. That Byrd loved to travel and lecture about his polar expeditions is quite evident. The polar regions and his expeditions were his very reason for existence. He said that from the time he was a child, he felt destined to be a polar explorer. He had a passion for all things polar, especially exploration that could scarcely be contained. Operation High Jump was at least as important in many respects as it would appear to his previous expeditions. So where was he after his return? Where did he go? Was he locked away so he couldn't share the story of what he really found in Antarctica? As some series suggest, during Operation High Jump, did he encounter and engage German forces operating from bases that lodged anti-advanced aircraft with advanced propulsion systems? Many think so, and I'm beginning to see some curiosities about the many aspects of Operation High Jump, and now perhaps even with Rane's expedition. A little tidbit mentioned that Rane forked in his book only begins to tell us why the Olena base, Antarctica postmark, is one of the rarest polar cancels that exist, with this being the first American post office established on the Antarctic continent. It is a shame the cancel was not used more often. There's possibly a larger reason why this post office was kept secret. We do know that many countries, including Britain, had concurrent secret bases and or expeditions in the same general time period, notably Port Lockheed on the Antarctic Peninsula. Port Lockroy was part of a top-secret World War II British expedition called Operation Tabarin. Operation Tabarin was the beginning of Britain's permanent presence in the Antarctic continent. It was built to serve as a southern outpost and to keep an eye on suspected German presence on the ice. In a 2001 BBC interview, one of the last remaining survivors of that secret expedition, Gawan Davis, noted that the posting of mail from the secret base was a way of laying claim to or establishing that section of Antarctica as British sovereign territory. In other words, just as the Germans are known to have dropped metal dark markers with the Third Reich's emblem on them over a large area of Antarctica during their expedition in 1939 to act as a laying of a claim for any country such as Britain to have a post office that actually accepted and postmarked mail definitively, shows an intention on their part not only establishing a base but of staying. When the United States did not then and does not now recognize any country as having specific territorial claims upon Antarctica, for Rane to have allowed his expedition members to have open mailing of their letters from Olena base would have served a similar purpose as with Port Lockroy. But for some reason, he would not allow that to be done. Why? Some mail did escape, and other mail from members of the Rane expedition is known to have been posted from nearby British bases. Posting of mail often serves as a geopolitical purpose, in addition to the simple fact it carries mail back home to loved ones. And in great curiosity to many polar philanthropists and followers of Antarctic history, that it was not done in this instance. The full story about the existence of the post office, as well as even greater secrets, may have passed with Captain Rane. The Olena Bay covers are most commonly seen with the date of March 12, 1947. which was the date of the expeditions arrived at Margaret Bay, Antarctica. In this instance, the cover illustrated above is extraordinary in that on a printed envelope for the Bird 2 Antarctic expedition, postmarked with less common hand cancellation from that mission. The repost marked at Alina Base in 1947 with the addition of Captain Irani's corner card and the IGY Ellsworth Station octagonal catch it. And the best part of all, Ronnie's signature in which he adds the word postmaster, rounding it out to make a splendid cover. A cover like this would fare extremely well in polar auction. It would go so far as to become the holy grail of a polar collection. Only a few covers I can think of would be more collectible in my opinion. So it's a description of the envelope that's postmarked with these various polar postmarks on it. Ellsworth Station. So that is Operation High Jump in a nutshell. And that is about as far as we're getting tonight. So, that's going to do it. Come back in a couple days, we'll do the Antarctic Enigma. I don't like to do a topic the following night. I hate doing back-to-back, because if you're here for one and you don't like it the next day, you're not going to come back. So, we'll do a different topic tomorrow, for Monday. On Tuesday, we'll revisit this story. We'll talk more about Antarctica. We do have the Antarctic Enigma to discuss. And this is a fairly long amount of information here as well. So yeah, we'll have to do a follow-up show. We'll definitely have to do a follow-up. All right, that was a lot of info. Yeah, it was a lot of information. Yeah, it was a pretty solid hour and a half of info right there.
Oh yeah, you just read for like over an hour straight. It's pretty damn good.
Yeah. I was thinking that. I was like, man, this is a lot of reading.
This is one of those shows where you don't have to do nothing, just sit here like it's a campfire story.
Man of Brave Hope says that was nice and girthy, dude. Yes. Sleep Marsh says girthy. Yeah, girthy. I don't know what's up with Man of Ray. Dr. Foreman Colossus says this is an on-topic record. Yes, we were on topic most of the night. So no, we're not going to move into food porn. I'm glad so many people have stuck around and watched the show. We had like 80-something people watching at this height of the show. So I appreciate you all being here. Tune in with us night after night, day after day as we delve into the world of the weird. I want to say thank you to Red Monarch and Yeah Okay Whatever Bruh for your generous super chats there. Much appreciated. Never expected, but always appreciated. I want to say thank you to my panel for being here tonight. And as we do, this has been the Creepy Little Book Live, and you've been listening to High Strangeness, the #1 late-night paranormal podcast on YouTube. I've been your host, Pete. With me tonight were Jesse Miller of the Crow's Nest, Mecha Random 42, and Tina Turner's Mystery. So you guys go ahead and leave. Don't forget to subscribe to the show if you're new here. I'll be happy to have you back tomorrow night as we do this every night at roughly between 11 and 11:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So we hope you come back and join us again. Thank you so much. Until tomorrow night, everybody. Stay creeped out.
Frameshift drive charging. Four, three, two, System scan complete. Frameshift drive charging. Four, three, two, System scan complete. Frameshift drive charging. Four, three, two, scan complete. Fuel scooping complete. Surface scanned by 50%. Surface scan complete. Frameshift drive charging. Four, three, two, scan complete. Surface scanned by 50%. Surface scan complete. Orbital flight engaged. Landing gear deployed. Flight assist off. Flight assist on.